no doubt my land is vast, so worship me alone and nobody else. The idea being that if a person has difficulty worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a place that they are currently, then not to worry, the land of Allah is vast. You can find other places to live and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in peace and with freedom. So that is the essence of what it means. Like when it comes to being in any place, it has to be a place that we're living where we can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not have that freedom compromised. And if that situation doesn't allow it, then the land of Allah is vast. We can find other places. Okay? So that was the basis. That's what the Quran gives us as the guideline, right? And Ibrahim alayhi salam, as an example, was a prophet of Allah who did many migrations. He says, for example, فَقَالَ إِنِّي ذَاهِبٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّي سَيَهْدِينِ, I am going to my Lord, He will guide me. Right? When he was leaving one place of the world, he left Babylon, that's where he was based in, to other parts. He went to Jerusalem, he went all over the place. He went to Makkah, alayhi salam. So when he is going on these journeys, he's going on this migration, he's going to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, فَقَالَ إِنِّي ذَاهِبٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّي سَيَهْدِينِ, I'm going to my Lord who will guide me. So that is the baseline. Now the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were having a tough time in early Meccan Islam, right? Like in the early Meccan era, they were having a tough time worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were banned from praying in the haram, right? They could not pray in the haram as a congregation, as a jama'ah. Even individually, if they were to be found, there were consequences. Like the Prophet ﷺ, who was this noble person coming from a noble family, many people protecting him, even he ﷺ was sometimes abused physically while he was praying. Like he was praying once in the haram, and Abu Jahl and his friends decided to dump the insides of a camel on his back. Right? So even he ﷺ, despite his stature and his family, even he couldn't do it without looking over his shoulder, right? So how much more were the poorer and less privileged Sahaba? How much more difficult was it for them? So they were having a tough time. They couldn't worship in the haram, right? And you know, the people of Makkah had a very interesting policy. You know what their policy was? The policy was BYOI, bring your own idol, right? You know, you have BYOD, right? So BYOI. Bring your own idol to the Kaaba, drop it and worship it, no problem. So they were very open to people worshipping any idol they wanted. But when it comes to worshipping no idols, they're like, nah, we can't have that. And they were very tough on the Muslims. So it was becoming very tough for the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. Some of the poorer Sahaba started to suffer physically, like Bilal radiallahu anhu, and Ammar radiallahu anhu, and his family, Sumayya and Yasir. They were all suffering physically. So the Prophet saw that. He could see that this is not getting any better, and it's going to get a little worse before it gets better. So he decided, ﷺ, that this is opportunity where we take a group of select Sahaba and send them to a safe place. Inna ardi wasi'atun fa iyaya fa'budu. A place where they could worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala freely, with two objectives. One is to save them from persecution, right? If some of us are getting persecuted, all of us don't need to be, right? Some of us can be in a situation of peace and security, right? And number two, if the worst thing happens, which is all the people in Makkah that are Muslims get wiped out, at least you have some Muslims surviving in another part of the world, and they can spread their religion. So the Prophet ﷺ thought ahead, planned ahead, and executed this plan, and sent some of the most elite Sahaba to Abyssinia, right? He sent Salama radiallahu anha and her husband. They went there. In the first migration, Uthman went, and then he came back. And then Ja'far radiallahu anhu, the cousin of the Prophet, right? The brother of Ali radiallahu anhu, right? His younger brother is more famous. So he also went there. Ja'far radiallahu anhu was actually a very interesting Sahabi. He was the same age as the Prophet. So you can imagine them kind of growing up together and being brothers because they grew up in the same house. And Ja'far was narrated to be the most similar to the Prophet ﷺ in appearance and manners, right? Like he was, there were two Sahabi who were very similar to the Prophet ﷺ in looks. There's Ja'far, number 2. Do you know who number 2 is? That one. Abu Bakr? They're not related. Someone who's related to the Prophet. Hint, is a grandson of the Prophet. Hassan, right? Exactly. So those two looked very similar to the Prophet ﷺ. Hassan so much so that the Sahaba would come after the death of the Prophet just to look at him, right? To remind themselves of the Prophet ﷺ. That's how much he resembled the Prophet ﷺ. So Ja'far was very similar and very close to the Prophet. So it was very tough for the Prophet to see him leave and go to Abyssinia. And when he finally made it back to Medina, all the way later in the year when Khaybar was conquered, the Prophet said very famously that today we have two good things. One is the conquest of Khaybar, and the second one is the return of Ja'far, right? Like that's how happy he was that his cousin, after all these years, is finally returning. So the Prophet really loved Ja'far, was very close to Ja'far, they were very similar in the way they were. So it was a big deal for Ja'far to leave the side of the Prophet and go all the way in Abyssinia, right? And he, radiallahu anhu, was the leader of the people in Abyssinia while they were there. Now, as they are there, the people of Quraysh are not going to rest easy, right? So I have my notes on my phone, I don't have them printed, so I'm going to read from there, not checking the score or something. Okay? So the people of Quraysh were not going to leave them alone. They were going to make their lives difficult. So they sent a couple of their representatives, one of them being Amr ibn al-As, radiallahu anhu, eventually accepted Islam, became one of the leaders of the Muslims. He went, and he was a very eloquent person. He was very, very skilled at negotiating, and he could convince you, right? And he was very charming. So he was it was a very good choice. He's a man that's very appropriate to send for this kind of task. So they send Amr ibn al-As radiallahu ta'ala anhu and another Sahabi to another person to convince the king of Abyssinia to send these guys back. Okay. Now the Prophet specifically chose the king of Abyssinia, whose name was An-Najashi, because he was a just ruler. Right? He was a person of justice. And that tells us how important it is to live wherever we choose to live. It's a place of justice. Like you can get your rights. If you want to worship Allah, you're afforded that right. If somebody wants to persecute you, you have your day in court, and you have a trial, a fair trial, right? As we'll see. So these rights sometimes supersede other things, right? Abyssinia was a foreign land, right? They didn't belong to Abyssinia. People in Mecca didn't really go anywhere, right? Other Arabs moved around all over Arabia. People in Mecca used to live in Mecca, and they would just go for trade and come back. That's all they would do, right? They would go for caravan business trips, but they wouldn't leave Mecca. They wouldn't leave the areas that they were born in, the house that they were born in. That was not their tradition. So this was a difficult thing. But because you want to worship Allah, فَإِيَّايَ فَاعْبُدُونَ, you pick a place that is just, or the ruler there is just, and then you worship Allah. So the land in Abyssinia, they've established themselves in Abyssinia, they're getting settled in Abyssinia, and Amr ibn al-As shows up. And Amr ibn al-As, when he shows up as the representative of Quraysh, he comes and he starts to convince the king. So what does he do? He gives the king some gifts, right? He presents him with this nice gifts that they have from Makkah, some good things that he would like. And then he says to the king that أيها الملك قد جاءوا بدين لا نعرفه لا نحن ولا أنتم ففارقوا ديننا ولم يدخلوا في دينكم. So he says, look, these people have brought this religion it's a new religion. We don't know it, right? And you don't know it either. Okay? So they're not part of us, and they're not part of you. Look at that, how strange. Right? So he's already painting the Muslims in a really bad light. Okay? And he says, that the best of, or the noble people of our people, right, of Quraysh, have sent us so that we can get these people back, right? So we can try them in our city. And these noblemen are min abaihim wa a'mamihim wa ashairihim. That these are their fathers and uncles and their family, right? Like this is their own people, so they know what's best for them, right? So send them back, please, right? وَهُمْ أَعْلَمُ النَّاسِ بِمَا أَحْدَثُوا مِنْ فِتْنَةٍ, right? This is, they know the best of what is happening, right? They have caused all this trouble, they've created all this chaos. Their fathers and uncles and family members know them best, right? They're not on your religion, they're not on our religion, so let us handle them, right? What are you thinking? So Amr ibn al-As very, very skillfully, puts the Muslims in a very tough position. Now, what happens is Najashi said that I will listen to what they have to say, right? I will not let them, I will not just allow you to take them, I will not kick them out until I have heard what they have to say. And this is the justice of Najashi, that he is going to give the Muslims their day in court. They have a chance to speak as well. So here is Ja'far radiallahu anhu. He is representing the Muslims. Everybody is obviously nervous because this is a big pivotal moment in their existence in that city, in that place. And if, for example, things go wrong, that could mean the end of them, right? And it's not going to be it's not going to be a pleasant journey back to Makkah, or even a return to Makkah, because people in Makkah are waiting, right? And they're angry. So a lot is on the line. Ja'far radiallahu anhu, he steps up to the occasion and he says, "Ayyuha al-Malik, kunna qawman ahla jahiliya na'budu al-asnama wa na'kul al-mayta wa na'ti al-fawahish." He says, we were a people who were people of ignorance. Okay? We had no morals, we had no ethics. We would just do whatever we want. We would worship idols. Right? We would worship these rocks and stones. We would eat roadkill. Al-mayta, you know what mayta is? Mayta is an animal that just died, right? Either some other animal killed him, or the animal died, or, fell off a cliff and died, right? So that kind of animal we're not supposed to eat. It's not halal to eat that, right? And even whatever the case is, that mayta is not halal to be consumed. Even if the animal itself was halal, like a chicken or a goat or something, right? It has to be slaughtered for us to consume it. So he's saying, we would just eat whatever. We would eat roadkill, disgusting things. We would na'til fawahish, we would do shameless things. We would lust, follow our lusts and do shameless acts. So he is now, presenting a rebuttal. وَنَقْطَعُ الْأَرْحَامِ وَنُسِيءُ الْجِوَارِ. We would cut off family ties. We would treat our neighbors really poorly. وَيَأْكُلُ الْقَوِيُّ مِنَّا الضَّعِيفِ. And the powerful would dominate the powerless. The privileged would dominate the underprivileged. Literally, يَأْكُلُ الْقَوِيُّ مِنَّا الضَّعِيفِ means like to eat them. The powerful is eating the weak. Not physically, that will be disgusting, but metaphorically, right? Eating up the resources, eating up their opportunities, dominating them, letting them, subjugating them to a lot of problems. So look how beautifully Ja'far radiallahu anhu is responding, right? He understands his audience. He knows he's up against it. He knows that Amr ibn al-As has painted them in the worst possible light. You see? And now it's his responsibility to undo that. Right? So there is the first lesson for us as living as a minority, which is we have to understand what we're up against. We have to understand who is, speaking against us. Who is it that comes on TV, and what is it that they say about us? Now you may not go up on TV ever. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But people that listen to that talk, who hear and watch that stuff, will also be around you, right? They will be your neighbors, they will be your colleagues. So we know what they have heard. We know what kind of preconceptions they're coming from. So as living as a minority, we have to be very well aware of what the people around us are listening to and what they are thinking. And this is important. Otherwise, a person is just like in a little bubble. They have no idea what's going on, and next thing you know, you're shocked when something bad happens. And our religion does not make us, does not tell us to just turn off our brain, right? We have to be aware of what's going on of our all around us. So that's a very important thing. So he understands where these people are coming from. He understands what kind of propaganda they have been fed. So he addresses the king appropriately. Okay. Then he says, we remain like this حتى بعث الله إلينا رسولا منا نعرف نسبه وصدقه وأمانته وعفافه. So then after that we remained like this until Allah sent us a messenger from us. We knew him really well. We knew his family. We knew his truthfulness. We knew that he was trustworthy. We knew his character was impeccable. He had integrity. And we knew afafahu. We knew that his intentions were good. He wasn't after power or women. He wasn't after money. We knew that he was somebody of the most the top, like his character was 100%. It was full of integrity. There's nothing to doubt about him. So when he called us to worship Allah, فَدَعَانَا إِلَى اللَّهِ إِنْ وَحِدَهُ, he called us to worship Allah, so we will worship him alone. وَنَخْلَعُ مَا كُنَّا نَعْبُدُ وَنَحْنُ وَآبَاؤُنَا مِنْ دُونِهِ مِنَ الْحِجَارَةِ وَالْأَوْثَانِ. He told us to leave all these rocks and idols. He told us to tell the truth, وَأَدَاءِ الْأَمَانَةِ, and be trustworthy, people of character and integrity. You know, when it's coming from somebody of character and integrity, it makes a lot of sense, right? If the Prophet ﷺ has always told the truth, so when he says to the people, tell the truth, they will accept that from him, right? He has always had integrity. When he says to the people, have integrity, they will understand that. So he says he told us about telling the truth, commanded us to tell the truth, commanded us to have integrity, to not cheat, commanded us to be good to family and to be good to our neighbors, and told us to stay away from things that are haram and to shed blood, and told us to not run after shameless things and lust after shamelessness, and not to وَقَوْلِ الزُّورِ وَأَكْلِ مَالِ الْيَتِيمِ, not to use manipulative words to win, to win favors, okay, or misleading testimonies, and not to prey on the money of the orphan, okay? Because the orphan back in the day was a very vulnerable child, has no father, right? So there's nobody to protect that child, right? There's no law that protects the child back in like old Arab society. So here's a child who has a lot of money because the father is dead, right? But nobody to protect that money or that child. So it's easy money for somebody who wants to take it from him, particularly if that's a relative, right? A relative is like, oh, I'm here watching the best interest of this child. Next thing you know, he's off with all the money. So he told us not to protect the money of the orphan, but you know what the orphan represents is the really underprivileged, the really powerless person in the society. So he's telling us to protect those who are underprivileged and need protection. وَقَفِّ الصَّلَاةِ وَأَمَرَنَا أَن نَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ وَحْدَهُ وَلَا نُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا. He says this, that he told us not to accuse chaste women of fornication, not to question their character. He commanded us to worship Allah and not associate anybody with him. Okay, this is the little speech from Ja'far radiallahu anhu. So, what do we learn from it? Number one, we learn that we have to know who our audience is, right? And what kind of nonsense, what kind of propaganda they have been fed, so that we can rebuke them. You see, if they have heard bad things about Islam, and particularly what elements of Islam that they've heard that are bad, we have to know how to counter that. It's very important. Okay? In the course that inshallah I'll be teaching here on Sunday, one of the things I talk about is one of the tough questions that were asked, not explicitly perhaps, but implicitly in academia. What might be asked of you if someone who is troubled by Islam, if they make up or they have some questions or they want to maybe troll you or something, right? What is it that they'll ask you, and how do we understand that, and how do we answer that? Okay, these are important things. Like, does the Quran teach you to hate the Jews? Does the Quran, teach us to be violent? Does the Quran, teach us to just follow the religion blindly? These are all questions. Okay, Some of them explicitly ask, some of them not. But we have to understand where these people are coming from and how to answer them. Okay? Very important. So we learned that from Ja'far radiallahu anhu. Right? That's how he implemented the guidance of the Quran, by explaining the vices that the community was suffering, that the Islam is coming to eradicate. Number two, Ja'far radiallahu anhu has his elevator pitch. You know what an elevator pitch is? Right? Or lift, you guys call it lift, sorry. The lift pitch. You were like, what's an elevator? Lift pitch. You know what that is? So, in like, I have some friends who are, who, you know, have startups, and they are, you know, always trying to get funding for their startups. So, you know what they do? They have what's called, you know, a pitch that they can give to an investor, the time it takes for them to ride a lift, right? So imagine you end up in a lift with, like, you know, I don't know, Mark Zuckerberg. They're like, oh, my chance to tell him about my product, right? So you have 30 seconds to explain concisely and very clearly what your product is and why is this such a good thing, right? That is the elevator pitch or the lift pitch. Okay, so you see, Ja'far radiallahu anhu has this beautiful, like maybe 1 minute long explanation of what Islam is, and he covers everything, right? He covers as much as is needed for his audience. Very concise, very much to the point. This is what the religion is. This is what it's eradicating. This is what it's bringing to the table. Okay? So as a minority, we have to know the religion really well. So well that you can communicate it in like a minute to somebody. Someone's like, oh, tell me about Islam. Or they're looking at you because you're wearing a thawb, right? And you start getting into a conversation. And this is your opportunity, right? This is, you are in the lift with them. Perfect. 1 minute, we tell about Islam. So it's not only that we need to know it very well, but know it concisely so we can convey it succinctly. This is a very beautiful lesson we learn from Ja'far radiallahu anhu. So after he's done this, you know, the king and Najashi says, this is wonderful, right? He's very impressed. He says, is there something that your prophet has received of revelation? Is there something of that that you know? He's like, yes. He said, could you recite it to me? So Ja'far radiallahu anhu recites Surah Maryam, right? And why Surah Maryam? What do you think? Huh? They're Christian, right? The audience, the king is Christian. The people in the court are all Christians. The scholars are, you know, they're scholars of Christianity. So Surah Maryam has Zakaria and Yahya, Maryam and Isa, their story. That's, you know, and they love them too, right? So as Ja'far radiallahu anhu starts reading the story, or reading the surah rather, of Surah Maryam, you see that Salama radiallahu anha, who was describing the whole incident, she says, وَبَكَى النَّجَاشِي Najashi cried until his beard became wet with tears. And the leaders, the religious leaders around him, the court, also cried because of the emotion, right, of the beauty of the Quran and of the profoundness of the message. So they were very, very impressed by Ja'far radiallahu anhu, very impressed with the message. And then Najashi says, إِنَّ هَذَا الَّذِي جَاءَ بِهِ نَبِيُّكُمْ وَالَّذِي جَاءَ بِهِ عِيسَى لَا يَخْرُجُ مِنْ نِشْكَاتٍ وَاحِدًا. He says, what your messenger has brought and what Isa alayhi salam has brought is coming from the same source. Allahu Akbar, right? And this is like even better than what they hoped for, right? They just wanted to stay in Abyssinia. Here he is, he's almost like ready to accept Islam. In fact, he did accept Islam. هذا هو الحق. This is the truth. Subhanallah. So he tells Amr ibn al-As that go away, I'm not going to let these guys go. They are here to stay, they're free. Amr ibn al-As was a skilled man, right? He's not going to give up so easy. So he's like, okay. On his way out, he's taunting the Muslims that you think you got away today? Trust me, I'm going to get you tomorrow. I'm going to tell them what you say about Isa alayhi salam. Right? You think you're all cute right now? You're reciting this surah. I'm going to tell them that you think Isa is not Allah's son. Let's see what he says to that. So, subhanAllah, the Muslims are now actually really scared. Because now, before it was just like, who are you, right? Now, you're directly confronting their beliefs. Right? Now, it's a matter of, you're questioning the beliefs of the king and the court. So now, Salama says that, all of us that day, right? We were, فَأَصَابَنَا الْهَمُّ وَالْغَمُّ. We were all like really sad and worried about what's going to happen. So they deliberated. What should we say tomorrow when Amr says this? What should we say? And Ja'far radiallahu anhu says, we will say what Allah says in the Quran about Isa, what the Prophet taught us. We will not hide the message. We will not change our religion just because we have to present it to somebody who believes something else. We will present it the way it was revealed. And that's the third really important lesson. As for us living as minorities, that our core does not change. Right? The core of the religion remains the same. Those core values, the core beliefs, and we do not change them because of societal pressures. Right? There's parts of the religion that are very flexible, no doubt about it. Okay, the way many aspects of the way we deal with people, the way we do business, the way normal day-to-day life works, much flexibility, right? But the core of the religion is the way it is. Okay, so here is now the Sahaba next day. They're summoned again, and Amr ibn As says, "O King, ask them what they think of Isa." Okay, now Amr is being a troll, right? He's being a full-out troll. It's like, ask them what they think of Isa, what they say about Isa. So now, so the king has invited them again. Ja'far is walking in, and immediately the king asks, فَبَادَرَنَا بِالْقَوْلِ. Immediately he asks them, what do you guys say about Isa? So, Isa alayhi salam, Ja'far who says, he says, إِنَّمَا نَقُولُ فِيهِ مَا جَاءَ بِهِ نَبِيُّنَا صلى الله عليه وسلم. He says, we say about him what our messenger says, or what our messenger has brought. So Najashi is like, well, what is that? He says, we say that إِنَّهُ عَبْدُ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولُهُ وَرُوحُهُ وَكَلِمَتُهُ الَّتِي أَلْقَاهَا إِلَى مَرْيَمَ الْعَذْرَاءَ الْبَتُولِ. Is that we say that he is the servant of Allah, and he is the messenger of Allah, and he is the soul of Allah, meaning the soul that Allah blew into him. And we believe that he is the word of Allah that he gave to Maryam alayhi salam, the chaste, the virgin. Okay? Meaning the word of Allah is what caused him to be created in Virgin Mary. And he is the soul of Allah because he was created by Jibreel alayhi salam. Everybody else is created by the drop of sperm, right? That's how we're all conceived. But he was conceived by the blowing of the soul by Isa, by Jibreel alayhi salam in Maryam alayhi salam. So it is a very unique person. That's what he says. And Najashi then struck the earth with his hand, and he says, he says like he drew a line, and he's like, what you have said, Isa doesn't deviate from this line, like from it, like even by this much, right? Like imagine he's visually trying to tell them that if this is what you've said, this is where Isa is, meaning he's exactly what you're saying, right? So now he says to Amr ibn As, he's like, take your gifts and leave. These people can stay as long as they want. SubhanAllah. So this really pivotal moment, we see the Muslims managed to get through it. Okay? They didn't water down their religion. Right? They did not change the core of the message. They did not change that, oh, here's a king who believes perhaps that Isa is the son of God. Let us also say the same thing. No, well, that goes against the foundation. That goes against the Shahada, right? Shahadu la ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah means Allah does not have a son, right? So they said, no, we will present the religion as is. understanding the audience. Who is it? It's Christians, right? So sharing the story of Maryam alayhi salam from the Quran, understanding what kind of propaganda they've been fed. So, presenting a rebuttal for that. Understanding also that the time is short. They don't have a time to listen to a lot of things. So very concisely speaking for Islam. All of these are very important things that if we want to live as Muslims and prosper, right? This is some of the things that we learned from the guidance of Ja'far radiallahu anhu. And unfortunately, as a minority, sometimes we all represent Islam. Like we will be like ambassadors of it, whether we like it or not, right? Whether we like it or not, we will be like Islam will be judged by us. Right? So sometimes I'm driving and some guys cut me off and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get him, right? I'm gonna overtake him and it's like look at him really, angrily. And my wife's like, why would you do that? Right? It's like, look, I'm wearing hijab, we're in the car, people will judge us, right? And first I'm like, forget them, I'm gonna get this guy. But then I'm like, you know what, you're right, right? You're right, people will judge us. Our actions are not just our actions. We, unfortunately, are carrying the burden of representing Islam, right? For better or for worse. And if we look at it in a positive way, it actually improves our character, right? Like, I was going to go to something with that guy, now I'm like going not to that. It's not good. It's misrepresenting Islam, right? Sometimes I'm driving to a masjid and wearing a kufi. Some guy does something, I'm going to take my kufi up and overtake him so he doesn't realize. SubhanAllah, right? Not good. You should put the kufi on and relax and not have road rage. But the point is, we end up speaking for Islam, right? So we have to know what is it that we're speaking about. Know the religion really well, right? فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا. Know that there is nobody worthy of worship except Allah in the Quran. So the idea of knowledge and understanding the religion really, really well, the core of it is very pertinent. So those are some of the lessons we learned from Ja'far radiallahu ta'ala anhu's khutbah. We also should mention that Najashi accepted Islam, and when he passed away, the Prophet ﷺ said that to this day a righteous person had died, and that he prayed the janazah in Abyssinia for him, right? Like he prayed janazah for him in Medina for Najashi. So radiallahu anhu, he was a sahabi, in the sense that he accepted Islam in the time of the Prophet ﷺ without ever having seen him. Allahu alam. So he was not just the king who allowed him to live, but he even accepted Islam. So alhamdulillah, that was some of the lessons from the guidance, from the example of Ja'far radiallahu anhu, who was implementing the ayah, Ya ibadi alladhina amanu inna ardi wasi'atun fa iyaya fa'budun. So inshallah ta'ala, with that we'll conclude. If you have any questions or comments, you can take them now. Otherwise, you can hang around, we can chill and chit chat, or you can go home. It's up